Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Dungeon Pub. Once again, I am your humble bartender, and today we are gonna have another one of those how to make a character videos. Only this time, we're not gonna be talking about, conceptual things or how to get inspiration. Instead, we are gonna be focusing on the races. And that's right, an entire video solely for the benefit of those of you who have been completely immune to the fantasy side of life so far. And I'm not sure how that really works, but I'm pretty sure there are people out there who have not come in contact with any of this stuff or have, decided that it's not interesting for them. But, somehow you have ended up on the table and maybe you have an idea about a character, maybe not. Actually, as a matter of fact, while going through the races, you might have a few ideas outright because they are very concise, they are very directed, and a lot of them follow very preset paths that have been done previously. As a matter of fact, if you think about it, these are very, very old concepts. The races themselves are not something new. Some of them are very mythological. Others are, how should I put this, unlike anything you have ever seen previously. But to kind of get the ball rolling, they are very close to what you might see in a Lord of the Rings movie, right? In a lot of standardized fantasy, a lot of fantasy books use these same concepts. And in D&D, that's kind of the idea. In D&D, you can find so many things. You can even create something of your own. And in the extended books, in the extended universe, if you want to think of it that way, in the additional content that's already out there for 5th edition, as well as Pathfinder and many, many other games, you can literally create a race of your own. But in order to do that, in order to be able to have that liberty, you're gonna have to have the core races, the core concepts that you can find in pretty much any fantasy setting, or not fantasy. There are a lot of other worlds where such topics kind of fit together. But where do we start with? Well, if you look at the player's handbook, the first race that you're gonna notice are the Dwarves, and the Dwarves are a classic, right? You cannot have a fantasy game without having dwarves in there. And if you can, I'm not sure how that's gonna work. That might be a very boring game. Why? Because dwarves are wow. I love dwarves. Dwarves are one of my favorite races, and the basic characteristics about dwarves are that they are shorter than your regular folk, right? And also very stout. They're, even though they're shorter than most humans, most elves, they are quite hefty, right? They're stout people, and that reflects into their character as well, into their living habitat and stuff like that. But the main thing you need to know about dwarves is that they are, number one, very honorable people most of the time. But number two, they have a very long memory, and they have a very long-standing list of friends and enemies. So they're very slow to make both, right? Both friends and enemies, but they're also very slow at forgetting them. And what else is there? Well, dwarves, they are all about the clan, right? They value hierarchy and order very, very highly. So a lot of the dwarves in the universe are lawful people. They are people who value the law of the country, the law of the kingdom, the law of the clan. So to kind of make a metaphor, you can take the clan out of the dwarf, but you can't take the dwarf out of the clan, or something like that. Because yeah, you're gonna find dwarves sometimes wandering away from home, and most of them are gonna be traders and armorers and jewelers and stuff like that. But dwarves kind of have this belonging, this sense of the homeland, sense of the home people, and you just can't take that out of them. Dwarves are also very industrious people. They like to dig deep into things, and yes, that's a joke. But for those of you that don't know, dwarves are very good miners, and they make their kingdoms deep within the mountain dwells, deep within the earth's core, where they mine most of their precious gold and raw iron and stuff like that. They are crafters and smiths. And to a large extent, dwarves are, I don't know, I'm trying to avoid racial stereotyping in these videos, but they're kind of like the Irish. They like to have a lot of fun, they like to fight and drink and sing, and you just don't mess with those guys, You better have them as a friend than an enemy. And if you have a dwarf friend, then you are a very, very lucky adventurer. Now, going past the fluff, and obviously if you like one of these races, if you like a specific one, you don't need to listen to my rambling. You can just go in and read all about it. Keep in mind that also every race at this current time in 5th edition has an extended lore, right? There are additional books, there are addendums and appendixes that speak more about the clans, and especially, talking about dwarves, obviously, more about the social structure, more about ancient history and how the dwarves came to be. So if you like a particular race, don't go out there listening to people like me. Just go read the books and maybe kind of delve deeper into making a character for yourself. Write a little backstory and stuff like that. In terms of statistics and things that you can put into your character sheet, going past the suggested dwarf names, which are just there to kind of extend the fluff and tell you how dwarves go about giving names to their denizens, you are going to find the traits, and that's the same for every single race out there, every single one that's in the books and also in the extended lore. And for dwarves, the main statistical increase is constitution, right? Dwarves are stout, hefty people. They're tough. They're natural underground dwellers, miners, fighters, and that kind of ends up with them having this increase. Also, it's the beards. Now, keep in mind that male dwarves have beards, and if you meet a male dwarf that doesn't have a beard, then something's wrong, right? You just expect some trouble, because if a male dwarf doesn't have a beard, then you just don't get that constitution increase. Okay, I'm kidding, but you kind of get the point. I mean, dwarves are all about the mining and the beards and the drinking. Of course, this is a stereotype within the stereotype, but again, it's a stereotype for a reason, and it kind of works. In terms of age, dwarves reach their maturity at the age of 50. So here you're kind of starting to get a little bit of the idea. Dwarves are slow to develop in terms of social interactions, right? That's why they have this whole hierarchy going on. And when you meet a dwarf in the world, he's not going to immediately trust you. He's not going to immediately be your friend. But if you manage to win his loyalty, if you manage to prove yourself in terms of strictly dwarven capacities for bravery and craftsmanship and the capacity to drink unquantifiable amounts of alcohol, then that person is going to be a very, very valuable ally. Why is this important in terms of age? Well, because humans reach maturity at about what, right? 16, 18, right? Maybe 20, 21 if you're living in Nebraska. And the thing is that dwarves take double the time. So, before this time, they're considered not to be adults. So, less drinking, which would kill a regular member of the other races. So anyway, alignments, it literally says that most dwarves are lawful, believing firmly in the benefit of a well-ordered society. So yeah, you kind of get the point. When you're living underground and when you kind of try to shy away from the other races, or rather shun other races, because dwarves are not shy about many things, then obviously you're gonna develop this sense of belonging to your own kin, your own clan, and this is reflected in their lawfulness. Now, depending on where they stand in the other spectrum of good and evil, that's a whole different topic. But in terms of their mental direction, right, their social hierarchy, they are mostly lawful people. So you're either gonna meet a dwarf who's gonna believe in law, or he's completely gonna be an asshole. But he's gonna be very, very, very lawful. In terms of size, dwarves stand between 4 and 5 feet tall and average about 150 pounds. Well, yeah, dwarves are big people, right? They're not pushovers, and even though their size is medium, they are fairly shorter than everybody else, which is reflected in their speed. Your base walking speed is 25 feet, so that means that you don't have the stride of a human or an elf or a half-orc, but you can really, really hold your ground very well. Dwarves have dark vision, right? So make sure you put that in your character sheet. That's a very, very important trait, because dark vision is it can save your life in many, many cases. Also, keep in mind that adventuring life constitutes a lot of deep delving and going into, well, the dungeons side of the Dungeons and Dragons game. So dungeons tend to be dark, and having a torch out at all times is not exactly the smartest thing. So dark vision can be really helpful out to 60 feet. You can discern patterns, but no colors. So there you go. Dwarven resilience. Yeah, dwarves live underground, so they're accustomed to life underground. They can see in the dark, and they also drink a lot. Because okay, let's look at it from this perspective. When you mine all day, then it's obvious that you're gonna spend a considerable portion of your free time in the tavern with your mining buddies, swinging brew and trying not to get your beard totally destroyed. So in that sense, dwarves have advantage on saving throws against poison and resistance against poison damage. So you could attribute that to them being tough and having this thick skin, but I'm a firm believer that drinking is very, very involved. Dwarven combat training, you have proficiency with the battle axe, hand axe, throwing hammer, and warhammer. Yeah, dwarves are all about axes and hammers, and if you didn't know that before, think about it. Makes a lot of sense. Heavy crushing weapons, kind of fits into the whole mold. Now, in terms of proficiency, dwarves are one of the races that provide a tool proficiency, and literally states that you can have proficiency with the artisan's tools of your choice. So that's smithing tools, brewer's supplies, or mason tools. So obviously dwarves are all about craft, right? And if you go into the extended lore, you're going to find out that dwarves are all about this growing up period during which they get to find what they're good at and apply those skills, maybe become a journeyman brewer, or go work under a legendary blacksmith. So stuff like that, very important for dwarves, and it's very important for you to put this in your character sheet, because you never know what kind of interesting idea you might have. Stone cutting. Whenever you make an intelligence history check related to the origin of stonework, yes, you're hearing me right, you are considered proficient in history skill and add double your proficiency. So you know all about stone. Now, could have something to do with the fact that you live underground, and most of the time dwarves build these massive kingdoms, these keeps within the mountain in order to protect their home, protect their gold hoards and their craftsmanship and their clan folk. But obviously you're gonna know all about how to shape a stone, and that could be important, could not be. This is very fluffy. So again, not the most important skill, but it's there for you, and could be fun to use it. Languages, Dwarvish and Common, obviously. Feel free to use the Dwarven scripture, right? The Dwarvish runes. They are below in the book, and it's kind of fun. And then sub-races. Dwarves have two sub-races to talk about: the hill dwarves and the mountain dwarves. Now, these are accessible to player characters. There are other races of dwarf, or rather sub-races, varieties like the Duergar, which are, the deep, they live deep in the Underdark, alongside the drow and mind flayers and stuff like that. And they are actually spoken about in the extended lore, but for this purpose, hill dwarves, well, yeah, it's kind of in the name. These are dwarves who, have escaped the captivity of the mountain, or rather decided not to, or it's just a clan thing, clan mentality has dictated that hills are better than mountains. Hey, it's all dirt and stone, right? So who's counting? You get to add an additional score, an additional ability score increase because of your choice in sub-race, and for hill dwarves that's wisdom. It gets to increase by 1, and dwarven toughness, which is different than dwarven resilience. So yes, dwarves get to be tough and resilient at the same time, so you don't get more macho than that. Your hit point maximum increases by 1, and it is increased by 1 every time you gain a level. So you have more hit points, which is very, very useful in many situations. As a matter of fact, I can't think of a single combat situation where having more HP is not beneficial, right? At least, okay, scratch that. I can think of a few, but that's not the point. So mountain dwarves are the other side of the argument, and you have your strength score increased by 2, right? So not by 1, like the wisdom of the hill dwarves. Straight up flat increase by 2, and you have proficiency with light and medium armor. So mountain dwarves are kind of built for combat, right? You get your dwarven combat training, you have your dwarven armor training. Now, yes, picking a fighter is going to give you all of that anyways, but think of all the interesting combos that you can make, with other classes like a cleric or a sorcerer or stuff like that. So yeah, dwarves get to be tough and fighter-like without being fighters, and that's kind of cool. I have to say, we haven't had many dwarves in our party. The single one that we did have came in very late in the campaign, and I have to say it was one of the more fleshed out characters, because at that time the books had already gotten out, and there was the extended lore. So the person who made that dwarf had enough time to kind of think about it and have a lot of stuff to work with. And yeah, the only thing that you need to master actually when you play a dwarf, and I'm saying it right now, so don't get mad if you are Irish, but you need to have that Irish, maybe kind of Scottish accent. It's the dwarven talk, So anyway, them's the dwarves, and moving right past that, we get to the elves. Now, elves are very, very opposite, very different to what the dwarves are gonna present you with. Unlike them, they are very graceful. They are slender. You know, they don't get to they don't get to have that heft about them. And again, compared to humans, they are slightly shorter. They weigh less, with the males, you know, weighing a little bit more than the females. And what's the most important thing about elves? Well, they get to live a very, very long life. And, you know, thinking about it just from that point of view, that's gonna make your character very, very different than, let's say, a human or even a dwarf, because having such a long life means that such mundane things like, oh, you know, war and famine and the end of the world, you know, you don't care about all these things all that much. Now, of course, if they threaten your home, that's a different thing, but, you know, the suffering of other people might not be that, you know, interesting to you. So with that being said, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Of course, that leaves you more time to, you know, refine certain things like, you know, smithing and art and song and I don't know, combat prowess. So with that perspective in mind, the elves are, well, they're very refined people, right? And that timeless perspective that the book talks about, and that refinement and, you know, sophistication that they possess in every single aspect turns them into very characteristic creatures, very fleshed out characters, I have to say. We have had a few elves in our party, and all of them have been very, very awesome. Unlike the dwarves, elves tend to live in these woodland realms, these forest domains and kingdoms. So again, combined with what we just spoke about, that makes the elves very seemingly carefree, very seemingly detached from the rest of the races, but also very attuned to the fineries in life, to the very deeper things about existence, like philosophy and art and stuff like that. That, of course, doesn't mean that they're not open to exploration or, you know, taking up the adventurer's life, but they do it for completely other reasons than the other races might have in mind. Elf names, again, feel free to check out those things. If you're a DM and you're checking out this video for some reason, thank you for doing that, by the way, it's actually a very good reference point for a lot of the standardized elven names. So you're gonna find your Jeffrey, your Thomas, your Henry in here only, you know, elvinified, which is not really a word. In any case, traits. What traits do elves possess? Well, a lot. Ability score increase, your dexterity increases by 2. So again, kind of like the dwarves, it's meant to reflect on the fact that elves are more slender, quicker on their feet. They have better balance, unlike the dwarves, who are, you know, stout, short, very powerful. Moving past that, age, again, we spoke about this. Elves typically claim adulthood and an adult name, so you see their names reflect their age, around the age of 100. Right. I mean, most humans don't get to live that long, so kind of get the point. And when you have that perspective in life, think about a character that might actually embody these views. You don't necessarily have to be an asshole, just, you know, kind of have the longer perspective. Think about your actions in a more broad term. Alignment, elves love freedom, variety, and self-expression, so they lean strongly towards the gentler aspects of chaos. Right? Well, here's the thing. Elves are not all about, you know, the lawful side of things. They have rules, but they're not laws. They're more like, you know, ancient traditions and things that would point you in the right direction instead of telling you what's right and wrong. In terms of size, elves range from under 5 to over 6 feet tall and have slender builds. So your size is medium, but you get to have 30 movement speed. So those are things important for your character sheet. Same kind of dark vision as the dwarves, because you're going to notice that elves do a lot of things, and they either truly do it better than everybody else or would tell you so. But in terms of dark vision, yes, they do possess it. They are a very old race, and that is reflected in many of their qualities. So dark vision, keen senses, you have proficiency in the perception skill, which is a very, very, very good thing to have right off your race choice. Perception is an important skill, and elves are better at it than, you know, the other races. So you get to have it right off in any variety that you may pick later. So moving past that, Fey ancestry. You have advantage on saving throws against being charmed, and magic can put you to sleep. Well, that's the whole thing about elves. They come from the Fey, at least in this rendition of 5th edition, or rather the Dungeons and Dragons lore. In many other games, actually, you're gonna see this this idea, and I strongly urge you to read about this more if you think about playing an elf, because it kind of tends to be important. Trance. Elves don't need to sleep. Yes, they don't even need to sleep. So obviously, they're more advanced than other people. Instead, they meditate deeply, remaining semi-conscious for 4 hours. Now, there are a few ways to interpret this, but basically the idea is that you can get a short rest, or rather a long rest for only 4 hours instead of 8 or more. So, you can spend the rest of the time doing something else, or, just being cool and telling your party how you can actually, kind of look out while everybody else is resting, which is kind of fun. Languages, obviously Common and Elvish fluid with subtle annotations and intricate grammar. Again, there is a scripture for this. There is, the Elvish alphabet, so go ahead, check that out if you're going to play an elf. It's very important. And sub-races. Well, elves tend to have 3 of them in 5th edition, and they're very different. They can fit into pretty much every concept that you might have. And as the book itself is going to tell you, they're not preset, right? So you can fit different patterns, different ideas that you have into every single subcategory of the elven race. So that's kind of cool. And starting off, we have the High Elves. So High Elves, they tend to be, the... how should I say this? The most astute of the elves. They are... Or rather, they consider themselves to be the oldest, and they consider themselves to be better than every other race, including other elven sub-races. They almost always have this understanding of magic that very few other races in the world possess, and that leaves them with very interesting bonuses in terms of what they can put in their character sheet. So as an additional ability score increase, your intelligence increases by 1. And that's going to come into play if you, want to be an arcane trickster or an eldritch knight or just up a wizard. Tends to be very, very useful, especially with the dexterity increase. Elf weapon training, kind of like the dwarves, they do possess standardized training. So longsword, short bow, and longbow. Them's the elven weapons of choice, at least for this particular sub-race. Cantrips, 1 cantrip of your choice from the wizard spell list. Intelligence is your spellcasting ability for it. This is cool. This is very, very cool because it means that whatever class you decided to play, whatever idea for a character you have, you're always going to have one of the cantrips. And I keep saying this, and I'm never going to stop. Cantrips tend to be some of the most powerful spells in the game because they are so flexible and they can just get you out of a nasty situation or set you up for very, very fun role-playing. It's actually kind of cool. And then lastly, extra language. You can speak, read, and write 1 extra language of your choice just because you are of the high elf variety. Now, moving past that, wood elves, they are kind of the opposite, right? Wood elves are not all about how high and mighty they are. As a matter of fact, they are very close to nature. They are very keen on protecting their woodland homes, and that has turned them into very interesting beings that tend to be, how should I say this, very protective, very secretive, but also very open to adventure, very interested in things around their forests. So with that in mind, their ability score increase is wisdom. You get to increase it by 1, and that's going to tie into a lot of preset, I would say, very I'm using the word cookie cutter, but that's not exactly the idea, because you can have the same idea, or rather you can have one character and give it different spins, different ideas, and it's going to end up being a completely different character. But again, they are very good rangers, very good monks. I have actually played a Wood Elf monk, very fun. Elf weapon training, same thing like the High Elves. Fleet of foot is the next uncommon thing, and it's actually unique for the Wood Elves. They are the most nimble and the fastest of all these standard races, so their walking speed is increased to 35 feet instead of just 30. And then Mask of the Wild. Now this is one of the coolest things that a race can give you ever, in my opinion. It allows you to attempt to hide even when you are only lightly obscured by foliage, heavy rain, falling snow, mist, other natural phenomenon. Now, later on in the game, because I still assume that you haven't spent a lot of time playing D&D, but later on, you're going to find out that hiding can be very important, especially if you're playing one of them sneaky classes. So with that in mind, Mask of the Wild can prove to be your very, very good friend, because it will allow you to use the rules in a way that is not broken or cheating, but actually plays in your favor. So that's very nice, very cool, and I've used it before, and it opens up all these both role-playing and purely mechanical options that you have, and that's just amazing when one of the rules can do that for you. And then lastly, to kind of finish up the elves, you have the Drow, or the Dark Elves. And I mean, come on, when you hear that name, what do you think, right? Much like the dwarves, they like to live underground, but instead of mining for gold and precious materials, they like to worship their goddess Lolth, which is kind of an evil deity, or more like a, a demon princess. And I mean, honestly, you've never heard of that ranger guy? Because if you haven't, go get that book. And even if you don't like fantasy, just read it, right? Just to kind of get an idea of their society and the way that they handle things. And dark elves or drow are kind of a thing of their own. They don't really fit into many of the other elven presuppositions or cookie cutter ideas that many people have. And where do we start? I mean, number one, the females are bigger than the males. They have this very spider theme about them. They're very patient, very scheming creatures, but they also have this powerful character about them. So again, unlike other elves who can be very chaotic, very neutral in their thing, the drow are more about the chaotic side, or going all the way to the other extremity, the very lawful side of thing, where the things where they follow the tenets of their goddess, or just the personal code that derives from their collision with this society that they have built. So in terms of the way that they look, unlike the wood elves who have this greener tint, more natural, more earth in color, or the high elves who are very fair folk, or just outright magically looking, the drow have this very dark tone, both in skin and in character. Their skin is almost pitch black with white or pale yellow hair, and they commonly have very pale eyes, including shades of lilac, silver, pink, and red, stuff like that. So you kind of get the idea. They're underground folk, they're underground creatures, very dangerous, very charismatic, very self-sufficient. So with that in mind, your charisma score increases by 1, right? Unlike the wood elves with their wisdom or the high elves with their intelligence, you are all about this inner feeling of your superiority and just outright belonging in the world. Furthermore, superior dark vision. Now, all elves get dark vision, but drow just do it better than everybody else, just because they spend most of their lives underground. So dark vision has a radius of 120 feet instead of 60. Kind of the same thing, but a lot better in many regards. Now, here comes the trade-off. Sunlight sensitivity. You have disadvantage on attack rolls and on wisdom perception checks that rely on sight when the target of your attack or whatever you're trying to perceive is in direct sunlight. So the sun is actually kind of bad for you, just because most of your time is spent underground. And as a matter of fact, many drow actually have this difficult adjustment time period when they leave the Underdark. So this is kind of playing into that. Drow magic, much like the high elves, only for the drow it comes from their inner attunement to the magical world. You know the dancing lights cantrip, so you don't get to choose, you just know this one specifically. And then as you progress in levels, when you reach level 3 and subsequently level 5, you get to always know these spells. You can cast them once per day with your charisma as your spellcasting ability, and that's kind of cool. I mean, whatever class you decide to play, then you're always going to have these options available. And then drow weapon training, again, very different from the rest of the elven races. You have proficiency with the rapier, the short sword, and the hand crossbow. So drow society, the way of fighting when you're a drow, or rather the mentality that drow possess, kind of leads them to these different choices rather than the more standardized stuff. And lastly, for the drow, there's an entire panel actually in the book called The Darkness of the Drow, which kind of gives you a further idea, talks about that ranger guy, again, just kind of saying. And it's actually very fun if you're thinking of playing a more dubious character, more not so, let's say, refined, not so direct in his intentions, then a drow is a very good choice for you.